Hello, welcome to another episode of Front Row. Today we have with us Dr. Nihal Pitigala, consultant, lead economist, USAID and World Bank. Welcome to the show, Nihal. It's very nice to have you here with us.
Glad to be here.
So you have extensive knowledge and research, especially in the field of international trade, and I believe you have been involved even in the crafting of the trade policy of the Sri Lankan government. So there has been a lot of issues, discussion and debate about Sri Lanka never having a trade policy, and I would like to know, why do you feel a country needs a trade policy and what are its benefits and limitations?
Good. Thank you, Subhashini. I certainly agree. I just recently found out that there's not a lot of people aware that there is a trade policy exists. And it is out there, it's on the ModSIT website. It's a good question because the world is not a static place. There's a lot of upheavals, and in international arena, as you see, there's quite a bit of turbulence. The recent in the China-US trade war and the uncertainties in the financial market. So countries need an operational guideline, and trade policy is the best anchor that one can use of. What it does is it sort of sets parameters to improve countries' productive capacity and to expand its exports and diversify its exports and make both farms and firms, giving them a fighting chance to compete in a global marketplace. So that's how subtly I will put why we need a trade policy.
So I would like to know, what are the key elements, because like you said, not many people know there is a trade policy, and maybe people do not really necessarily go and download the document and read it as well. So maybe for the audience, can you let us know what are the key elements of Sri Lanka's trade policy?
The core element of Sri Lanka's trade policy is the trade reforms, trade and tariff reforms. As you very well know, you yourself have done some work. We have a rather convoluted trade policy in the past. It is highly necessary to revisit the trade policy, especially to look at the para-tariffs. And the traditional trade policy is, I think, a priority of the new traditional trade reforms is a priority of this trade policy. But also associated is with the regulatory reform. Some of our legal and regulatory structure that supports trade are not there. If they are there, there are some weaknesses. I'm basically referring to lack of competition law, the standards institution. There are a lot of laws and regulations that's not been completed. Anti-dumping law actually has been introduced. That's wonderful. So that's the second element. Then once you start talking about trade is an all-encompassing topic. It doesn't confine to traditional areas anymore. Trade goes beyond traditional sphere into behind the border issues, especially trade facilitation. As you know, if you stack up the trade facilitation costs exceed the cost of tariffs sometimes, but that may not necessarily be the case for Sri Lanka. Then there are issues of services. Services obviously is very important. It's the largest segment of the economy, and it's a growing segment of the economy, and its service efficiency is very important for trade. So services is part of the trade policy that we have proposed. Then there are issues of innovation. Sri Lanka is basically planning to be a high-income country, and it's important for us to move beyond that. We are actually doing not that great with our diversification and also our sophistication of our exports. So that's an important aspect.
So what you're saying, Nihal, makes me think that trade policy it has to be very much aligned to your agriculture policy, industrial policy, your investment policy, and it is very difficult to be to have a trade policy without the other policies in the country being aligned to it. So what do you feel, especially in Sri Lanka with such a fragmented ministerial structure in the country, what are the challenges in taking forward these reforms, because those people who benefit from the existing systems and protection will aggressively resist this kind of reforms?
That is unfortunately is part of the battle that all countries now face. One of the things I would say is that we have not, we actually did articulate that in the trade policy, that the trade policy is about giving firms and farms the right incentive structure to operate both domestically and overseas. One of the biggest elephant in the room is the consumer. We have not highlighted the aspect that most of these eventually benefit the consumer. It gives the wider variety of products to choose. It lowers the cost while improving the efficiency of the domestic industrial environment. So unfortunately, the resistance to some of these things and the controversies are usually focused on very narrow sets of issues, which really doesn't translate into how the benefits are accrued in an agreement. The other thing I wanted to say, I think you and I discussed this before, why is this different from the past? Now, I would say fundamentally this trade policy, we set a vision. The vision is that Sri Lanka needs to structurally transform. And it sets out how Sri Lanka could structurally transform through the trade policy as a mechanism, as a catalyst. Principally, basically undertaking the type of tariff reform that needs to be done, undertaking the regulatory reforms that need to be done, and boosting up the areas of trade facilitation, transparency, the whole host of doing business environment, trading across borders, trying to improve the rankings of the trading across borders. These are a multitude of things that is different from what has been envisioned in the past. And given the poor performance, Sri Lanka has no other option to come up with a fairly streamlined trade policy instrument.
So we are witnessing a world where not just in Sri Lanka overall there is a significant backlash against liberalisation and opening of economies, even in countries that like United States that used to be champions of free trade. So in this environment, what has happened if trade liberalisation is so beneficial and if countries actually can do better, why is this backlash and how can the world face this?
Okay, so I think the backlash, there is a merit to some of the arguments who are skeptics to a free trade agreements that has ideas that has put forward. There are, as you know, with free trade, there's winners and losers. Unfortunately, the gainers have not compensated the losers, not that they are required to, but the system hasn't designed in a way that the trade end up being equitable. This is why countries like even Sri Lanka, when we did the trade policy, insisted that we have a safeguard mechanism, adjustment mechanism to compensate for those who lose, because inevitably there will be losers. But country like US is finding out. They have improved efficiency by trade. Trade is always good. Under most circumstances, open trade benefits all, and interfering with those channels of free trade usually end up everybody being worse off. But obviously one has to address this fallback that some other constituents might end up losing, and you need to find a way to compensate it.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very important message, I think, for us in Sri Lanka to ensure trade liberalisation does benefit everyone, and also have measures to mitigate the negative impact on groups of people who are going to be adversely affected. Thank you very much for joining the show. Stay tuned for another episode of Front Row.